Why don't I stop talking for a few minutes and let's ask Erin to turn the microphone over to Piave. Please introduce yourself to those who haven't met you, and why don't you give us a little bit more of a feeling for how this study actually went about in terms of the collecting of these data. So I'm going to shut up. Do I have to do anything on this end, Erin, except shut up? Because I see Kiave and I don't hear him, so he just waved. Okay, let me see. I'm going to turn my sound up. Okay, keep talking. Gabby, are you waiting? I think the microphone might be yours, so please take over.
Yeah.
Why don't we send in chats if we can't hear him? Rachel, how are you? Rachel can hear you, so please.
Yes. Quiet.
Yes.
How about now? Is that better?
Better?
Better. Okay. All right. So,
yeah, if you would. I mean, everything I did, I took out of your paper. But tell us some more about this study. How did you actually find these people? How did you collect these data?
Okay, the Kohala Health Research Study was formerly known as the Native Hawaiian Health Research Project. And back in the early 90s was actually when the door-to-door census was done in the North Kohala community to get an idea of the number of Native Hawaiians residing in the area before the actual study was conducted. So actually, the surveys itself was not done door-to-door. And this particular study here reports on a data set that is actually year 6 to 7 of the Native Hawaiian Health Research Project. And this is actually a multi-ethnic data set, which there were included approximately just over 500 Native Hawaiians, as well as Japanese, Chinese, Caucasians, and other ethnic groups, Filipinos as well. And here we're just interested in Native Hawaiians and the relationship between acculturation and type 2 diabetes. The acculturation measure was actually designed by the Native Hawaiian Health Research Project because it was very difficult to find a measure that measured ethnic identity and cultural affiliations across different ethnic groups. Most of them are very specific to a particular ethnic group. So we needed to design a survey that could be applicable across different cultural groups. So based on this acculturation scale, basically it's asking about we ask people to first select all the ethnic groups, their ancestral ethnic groups that they belong to, and of that, which one do they most identify with? And of those Native Hawaiians who most identify, they go on to complete the acculturation modes using Native Hawaiian as the reference group for their cultural group. And they ask a series of 4 questions, I believe, on this. They ask about how they feel towards that ethnic group, their affiliation towards, their knowledge about, and so forth, and the impact it has on their lifestyle. And then it asked about their relationship or their attitude towards the U.S. mainstream culture, and it asked the same items, the same 4 items, just in the context of the mainstream culture. And then based on that, we cut scores. Basically, the median the median score is the cut point here. To whether they were high or low on the identification, whether they were high or low on Native Hawaiian culture identification, high and low on the American mainstream. That's how we measured that. And as you mentioned, we used World Health Organization criteria to determine diabetes status. Um, the reason why we're looking at acculturation in type 2 here is because acculturation modes have been found to, or acculturation itself has been found to be associated with type 2 diabetes in other ethnic groups, but no one looked at a native group. And we chose this particular model of acculturation because it makes no assumption that, it assumes that one can have a bidirectional identity, meaning that they can identify highly with one group as well as identifying highly with another group, rather than older models of acculturation, which it measured more of a unidirectional, meaning the more they're acculturated towards the American. And the acculturation modes are simply markers for other things that are probably more specific factors that are related to diabetes, but this was just a start to look at in-group, within group differences in the prevalence of diabetes. And again, it was a
Mhm.
cross-sectional observational study, meaning that we just took this information
Great.
once.
So if I understand
Different?
what you're saying, Yave, the integrated group over in the, if I look at your figure one, these are people who would rank high on the identity subscale and high on the impact of lifestyle subscale, while the traditional are people who are high on the identity but low on the impact on lifestyle. Is that, am I reading that correctly?
No,
Other way
no.
around? Okay.
The Yeah, so there's two subscales here. Yeah, there's the Hawaiian subscale and the American subscale. So for the integrated, they're reporting high identification with both the American and their Hawaiian
Yeah.
cultural heritage. The traditional group is just highly
Right.
Hawaiian.
Okay.
They do not highly identify with the American mainstream. Assimilated is only high on the American mainstream. Marginalized is low on both.
And before I leave this slide, let me ask the other group a question. Where you had, if I go back to the previous slide, you found that most of the people here were in the integrated category, and there are a fair number in the traditional category, but relatively very few in the last two categories, marginalized and assimilated. So if I go back to the figure, the the two categories here on the far right contain relatively few people. Was that at all surprising, or was that expected?
That's expected. Very, just from what I know, of all the Hawaiians I know, very few would say that they no longer identify with being Hawaiian. So we expected a low number assimilated as well as marginalized. It's a tough one. There's, in Hawaii, there may be other identifications or ethnic identifications they're having because of multi-ethnic,
Mm-hmm.
uh, ancestries. So yes, it's hard to really interpret the marginalized. It may be simply that they're identifying with another ethnic group that we're
Well,
not
the
measuring.
point I wanted to raise, and we'll get to this in a few minutes, is that when you take a survey of a population and hope to find in that population different subgroups of people that you can compare outcomes in one subgroup to another, you are limited to the natural distribution of that subgroup. So if you wanted to compare the assimilated group to the traditional group, or the marginalized group to the integrated group, this design is only having, as Patrick even sent in a question a minute ago, there are only 19 people in the marginalized group, 8 in the assimilated group. So if you wanted to have more people in those groups, you'd have to either enroll more people in your entire study, if these percentages reflect the prevalence of those characteristics among the Native Hawaiians, or you'd have to find a way to recruit a population that has a higher number of assimilated or marginalized people. Now, before I go on, I have a question to Erin. I have a chat box I look on my screen. Does that chat box appear on everyone's screen? In other words, when someone sends in a question, as Patrick Ohana just did, are we all seeing it, or is something I should repeat? So everyone sees it. So please note that Patrick's comment that 2 of these groups are relatively small, because that's going to be an important point in a minute. But what I'd like you to do now is think about that slide, and I'll show it back in a second. But there are some questions I want you guys to think about. And the first one is, if you were Piave and you're writing this paper up, and you have this very nice figure, you also have to write up an abstract to your paper. And in the abstract, you can't include figures. You can only include some summary numbers. So how would you summarize in words the results that were displayed in that figure? That's one question I'm going to ask you to think about. The next question I'm going to ask you to think about is, do these data suggest that the risk of developing diabetes is greater among Native Hawaiians? Now, this was not meant to be a trick question. I shouldn't have put Native Hawaiian there. I meant to put people who are in the traditional group, because everybody in Kiabe's study was Native Hawaiian. You have no data